So the fate of most legislation is the dying committee, right? Which tells you that the committees are really important players in the legislative process, right? Okay. When we talked earlier, a couple of class meetings back, we started this topic on Congress, and I told you that people like Richard Fenno and Randall Ripley and others who write about the United States Congress, who have built their careers on studying the United States Congress, tell us that we ought to think about Congress as a multiplicity of decision centers, as the ordinary condition being a fragmentation of power. This is the cornerstone of that fragmentation of power, the committee system. This is where the real power rests. It's not at the level of Congress as an institution. Okay, but let's move on. Let's say against the odds, the full committee reports the bill out to the floor. Why do I say against the odds? What are the odds, Thomas, that a bill gets reported out to the floor?
Less than 10%.
That's right, less than 1 in 10, right? I can say that a number of additional times if it doesn't impress you yet. I'm really trying to impress upon you that it's a very low probability thing, right? That a bill that's introduced into Congress will make it as far as what we're talking about right here. So against the odds, this bill gets reported out to the floor. In the House of Representatives, it has an initial stop at the Rules Committee. The Rules Committee, there's not a Rules Committee in the Senate. This is just the House of Representatives. The Rules Committee, however, is a very important committee in the House of Representatives. It is a committee that wields a lot of power. And representatives, members of the House of Representatives, if they get assigned to this committee, that means that they are real power brokers. Okay? Now, on the surface, it appears that this committee might not be that important, because what this committee does is it writes the rules governing floor action. Okay? Remember, the House of Representatives has 435 members, so they have to have some sort of system of rules to govern how the process works. You can imagine how chaotic it would be on the floor of the House of Representatives with 435 members if there weren't some rules of procedure. They're going to write rules governing how much time is going to be allotted to debate on the floor for this bill. They're going to write rules governing who is allowed to speak for the bill and against the bill, and how much time each of those members are going to be allotted to speak. Okay? The rules in the House are much more rigid than they are in the Senate. And I think that's principally a function of the size of the chamber. Okay? Nevertheless, what we're saying here about the legislative process is the Rules Committee cannot table the bill, like we said with the full committee and the subcommittee. Okay? So that's not really an option. They can't just put it aside and say, we'll get to it later. They have to report it out. They have to, it's going to go out to the floor for debate and a vote. But they can write rules. This is the important part. The Rules Committee can write rules that are either favorable to the passage or the defeat of the bill. If you're not convinced that that's true, let me ask you a question. Let's take this off the screen for a second. How many of you, just a quick show of hands, how many of you have ever played a game with someone and you're convinced that as you're playing the game that the person that you're playing against is making up the rules as they go along? Anybody ever had that experience? Then you probably understand that those who write the rules, those who make the rules, that goes a long way in determining the outcome, doesn't it? Okay? So what I'm telling you is that this is why this Rules Committee is so important, because it can write rules in such a way that will virtually assure the passage or the defeat of the legislation. Okay? All right. We're going to get out to the floor, though, ultimately. We're going to count that as veto point number 4. We're going to get out to the floor, and what's going to happen on the floor? You're going to have some debate. You're going to have some discussion. But ultimately, what's going to happen? They're going to take a vote, right? And what are the two possible outcomes of this vote? This is not a trick question.
They can either read to the...
No, we're on the floor. We're on the floor of the House of Representatives, all 435 members, right? And they've had some period of time for debate and discussion, and now the question is going to be called. All those in favor? say aye, or they actually do it electronically, right?
Yes.
All those in favor vote, yes. All those in favor vote no, right? So what are the two possible outcomes? It is either going to pass or fail, right? And so there is some possibility that it's going to fail. And so if it fails, the bill is just dead, right? So we're going to have to count the floor as a veto point, right? That's veto point number 5. Right? You can just die right here on the floor vote. Now, before I go on to the Senate side, I want to digress here for just a second for a little footnote, okay? Because I said, what is the probability that a bill will die at the full committee or subcommittee level? Thomas, you're our expert. At least 90%, right? It's at least a 90% probability. I told you there would be a couple more times that we would make that point, right? Okay, so there's at least a 90% probability that the bill is going to die here, right? I should point out, though, I would be remiss, I would be derelict in my duty in describing this process to you if I did not concede that there is a mechanism in the House of Representatives to force the committee to report the bill out to the floor. Okay? It's called the discharge petition. Okay? They do have a device in the House of Representatives called a discharge petition. So if you can get enough votes on the floor, if there are enough members of the broad chamber that want to force the committee to report this bill out to the floor, they have that device. But it's very rare. Okay? Now, why do you suppose it's very rare? Why do you think it would be rare that the full membership of the House would vote to force the committee to report the bill out to the floor? The committee has tabled the bill, right? Yeah.
Because then they wouldn't have vetoed it.
They would have what?
Vetoed it.
Well, no, it's not, remember, it's not a formal veto. They don't really veto the bill. They just say, we're putting this bill off for future consideration with never having any intent of ever getting back to it. The effect of it, though, is to veto it. Okay? It's not formally, they're not formally saying, vetoed, move on to something else. They're saying, let's put this aside and deal with this next matter on the agenda, right? And they never get back to it, right? But the effect of it is to kill it, right? Now, what I'm saying is, let's say that our 4 classrooms or the House chamber, right? And you all are members of the House of Representatives, and there are about 415 additional people in the chamber with you, right? And a majority of you say, well, despite the committee tabling that bill and putting it aside, we want them to report that out to the chamber so we can take a vote on it. Okay? I'm telling you that that's a possibility, but it rarely happens. Okay? That's why I'm doing this in a footnote. Right? It rarely happens. And all I'm asking you is, why do you think it might be so rare that it happens? Well, who do you think most of the members of the House see as the experts on farm policy? F-A-R-M, farm policy. Who do you think, like, you're not on that House Agriculture Committee, you're on the House Ways and Means Committee, or you're on the House Armed Services Committee. Your expertise is in military policy, right? And the members of the House Agriculture Committee, who are ostensibly the experts in this area of public policy, are telling you, this is a bill that we don't really want to deal with, right? We're just going to put this aside. I think the point is that I'm trying to get at is that the broader membership is likely to defer to the expertise of the committee. And if the committee says it's not worth dealing with right now, or we're not going to deal with it right now, they tend to go along with that.